presenters have come all the way from Canada. I'd like to introduce Wendy McDonald and Robin Acton from the Alberta Association for Community Living. Both Wendy and Robin are parents and have been involved with the Rotary Employment Partnership. In this presentation, they will share how this partnership has assisted people with a disability to get real jobs in the community.
Robin and I both hail from Alberta, Canada. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, which is a city of approximately 1 million people. And the picture on the left depicts the Rocky Mountains, of which is about a 3.5-hour drive from my door to that mountain.
And where I live doesn't look at all like that. It looks much more like the yellow canola field that you see in the other picture. Very bald, flat prairies. We have a joke there that if your dog runs away, you can watch it do so for 3 days.
It's true. It's not that funny. So that's a picture of Edmonton at this time of year, because we left our summer to come to your winter, but I have to tell you the temperatures are pretty close at the moment.
And this is a picture of the differences between our summer and our winter. So when I'm mingling here today and listening to people talk about the cold in Melbourne, you haven't seen cold, trust me.
Or felt cold, trust me. So this is a picture of my family. That's my husband Blaine and my 2 sons, Kyle and Aaron. And Kyle has a developmental disability. So I'm really speaking today with a couple of hats on. Primarily and always first, I am a mom. And I am also a Rotarian. And Robin and I are going to talk to you today about an initiative that started in Alberta about 10 years ago when I was asked to be president of my Rotary Club. Does anybody in the room know what Rotary is? Hey, and are there some Rotarians in the room? One secret handshake over here.
Oh,
a couple secret handshakes, okay. So, for those of you who don't know what Rotary is a global service organization. There are Rotary clubs in 170 countries. There's 1.3 million Rotarians. And I know that in Australia, Rotary is very strong. I've had the privilege of working with some Rotarians in the last year who came to Alberta. And so Rotary's motto is service above self. And I was a Rotarian before I was Kyle's mom, just to give you a little history. And when I was asked to be Rotary president in 2000, every year Rotary International has a leadership change from the president of Rotary International all the way down to the president of every Rotary club around the world. And those Rotary presidents set out global objectives for Rotarians across the world. And the year that I was going to be president, the Rotary International incoming president was a fellow by the name of Frank Devlin from Mexico. And one of his initiatives that he challenged Rotarians across the world to think about was creating employment for individuals with disabilities. So here I am at this Rotary convention, happened to be in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm sitting listening to this Rotary International president talk about his objectives for the year, and at the time my son Kyle was 5. And it really was a turning point in my life, because it was a moment where my world as a mom and my world as a Rotarian collided. And I thought, what are the odds that the year that I'm going to be a Rotary president, Rotary International is going to talk about employing people with disabilities? So I came home from that convention really charged up and said, that's what my Rotary Club's going to do. We're going to create employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And I met with my board and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to leave a mark in my Rotary year, and this is the mark I want to leave. And my board said, great. And then we all sat around and stared at each other. because we really, although the idea was great, we didn't know what or how. So one of the things that is really important to understand about Rotary and Rotarians is to become part of Rotary is based on your vocation. Now it's changed a little bit now, but the history in Rotary is that Rotarians come together to do work in the community and internationally for service above self, but you can never have more than, now it's 10% of one club to have more than one vocation. So the idea is every Rotary Club would have one lawyer, one doctor, one accountant, one veterinarian, one whatever. And so because Rotarians come together based on vocation, they even more so than maybe other groups understand the importance of work, because they wouldn't in fact be able to be part of this Rotary Club if they were not in a career. Most Rotarians, and not all, are typically senior managers, CEOs, and presidents, and are in leadership in their organizations. I would say that the only reason for that is primarily because of the time commitment and the financial commitment, not because it's elitist in any other way. So I sat with my board and I said, this is what I want to do, and we all stared at each other, and I started to do a little bit of work and become a little more informed about what the realities were for adults with developmental disabilities in Alberta. And I was alarmed because I didn't understand it, because as I said, my son Kyle was 5 at the time. But I was alarmed to understand that the unemployment rate for adults with disabilities in our community is around 70%. So what that means is basically destined for a life of poverty, marginalization, and government assistance. And I have to tell you that in that moment, my vision for my son Kyle is absolutely no different than it is for my other son. And I was determined that his life was not going to be what those government statistics showed. And I felt, because I know the power of this particular organization being Rotary, I felt that this organization was particularly organized in a way and powerful enough that we could change that reality. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. So I, again, got to work and understood that there was an organization in our community called the Alberta Association for Community Living, whom I had been introduced to but didn't know much about at the time, who does this kind of work. So maybe, Robin, you can talk about what AACL is.
So when Wendy came to the Alberta Association for Community Living with the idea that possibly Rotary could create a partnership and we could address this horrible unemployment rate, I was the president of the Alberta Association for Community Living. I'm also a parent, and at that time was also a Rotarian. So needless to say, was very enamored with the idea. AACL is a family-governed, family-based organization across the province of Alberta whose primary purpose is to create meaningful, inclusive lives in community for individuals with developmental disabilities. And we view the mechanism for making this happen as families. So we invest a lot of energy into family leadership and empowering families to assist them in pursuit of good lives for their sons and daughters. So we were very, of course, interested in becoming engaged in this partnership, and knew, of course, that work of this nature we were going to need funding. So our third partner in the initiative was our Persons with Developmental Disabilities Board, which is, I won't get into a long explanation, essentially a quasi-governmental organization that provides funding for services to persons with developmental disabilities. So they came on board and were interested in providing some startup funds to enable the partnership to hire some support, so a coordinator to support the initiative.
So one of the cool things that happened right at the beginning is that AACL said absolutely they'd come in as a partner and basically provide the, for lack of a better term, disability expertise. Rotary's job is to find jobs. Rotary's job literally is to open doors and possibilities. And then we had this, we like to try and keep them silent, partner, this funding partner. So one of the things that we were able to do right off the bat was go to Rotary and say, we don't want anything from you other than the possibility for you to create employment within your organizations. For those of you that are familiar with Rotary, Rotarians and Rotary clubs are inundated with requests, usually for money. And so it was a unique opportunity to come within Rotary and say, we don't want your money, we want your hearts. We want you to think about what your business might be able to offer in terms of some employment opportunities. Because both Robin and I are Rotarians, one of the things that we're going to say probably repeatedly throughout this presentation is, and one of the key learnings we've had, is this only happens when it is driven by Rotary. If we try and come outside in a sense, if you are not part of Rotary or have a Rotarian that is leading this within their Rotary club, it becomes not much different than other employment agencies, I guess, in a sense.
So right from the get-go, we decided that the goals of the partnership were pretty simple. First off, to secure meaningful employment. And when we talk about employment, we mean employment as it would be defined for most of us. Work for pay. Work for pay right from the beginning, which is how most Rotarians who are employers only see employment. What we learned pretty quickly is in the human services field, we have all sorts of language around employment that has no relevance with employers that aren't introduced to our world. So it was real work for real pay. The second goal of the partnership was to broaden the career options available to people with developmental disabilities. So we believed that people were capable of doing much more than they were often seen to be doing. So we wanted to see if people could, you know, find jobs working in financial institutions, to, you know, run forklifts, to do all sorts of different things, as opposed to the typical type of work we see people relegated to. And the third goal of the partnership was, to the extent possible, utilize the supports that naturally exist within the workplace. So that was our default position. What we asked of employers was, we want you to accommodate this employee to the same extent that you accommodate all your employees. Because when we started talking about it with employers, employers accommodate every employee they hire. They just might do it in different ways, and they do it in ways that they don't even think of as accommodation. But they are accommodating. So we wanted to, and of course try to embed the people that worked into relationship with their fellow employees such that they would be the supports if necessary. Now, having said that, certainly there are some folks who've obtained work through the partnership who require more support than would be reasonably expected from an employer. So yes, there's lots of folks that work that still, you know, avail of a job coach. I hope I'm using the same language that you do here, but that have external supports on the job. So Wendy alluded a little bit to how this is different from typical human services initiatives, and we get this question a lot, especially when we talk to Rotary clubs. They look at us and go, well, we have an agency in our community that does this. And absolutely, and we have in Alberta, as I'm assuming you have in Australia, lots of very committed, good supported employment agencies that are out there trying to find people work. And our response is absolutely, and if those folks could have solved the 70% unemployment rate by now, they would have. So there's definitely room for a new idea. So what we say is the difference between this initiative and what we typically see in supported employment is that it isn't the job developer or the person from the agency who is out there pounding the pavement trying to find people work? It's Rotarians. Now, we've heard it said that it's possible for a job developer to make 200 cold calls to find one position. I can tell you it doesn't take a Rotarian 200 phone calls. There's a culture within the organization that if I, as a Rotarian, phone a fellow Rotarian up and say, what do you think about this? Would you consider doing this? Because we're in the club, so to speak, it's something that typically people will receive more favorably. So it's different because it's a different way of sourcing potential employment. And we use existing business expertise. We're not reinventing the wheel. Who's better at hiring and sourcing than the people that do it every day to run their businesses? So we make sure that we articulate every time we have an opportunity to talk about the partnership how it is different, but there's absolutely room, more than enough room, for both initiatives, and in actual fact, we very much collaborate with the agencies that are in our communities where the partnership exists because we need their support when it comes to job coaches and on-the-job support when necessary.
So we have seen this work in large urban centers. It started in Edmonton, but it very quickly moved to, Robin talked about living in Lloydminster, which is a smaller community. And so we have initiatives across the province of Alberta in both large and small centers. And in fact, there are initiatives now in other parts of Canada and the United States. And we had the opportunity last fall to be in Auckland and presented at several Rotary clubs launching the partnership there. So how did it start? So after that initial board meeting and my club saying, absolutely, let's look at doing this, getting AACL support as a partner and getting the funder, we had to then start talking to Rotary clubs and Rotarians about what it is we were trying to achieve. So from my perspective as a mom, it was really clear for me what I wanted. I wanted to know that when Kyle was entering the workforce, that there were going to be employers out there who were going to be open, able, and willing to have him in their organizations. So for me, the vision was pretty clear. But what I learned very quickly is for the average Rotarian or a person in our community who isn't connected to this world, they didn't know what we were talking about. So when I started and I did the very first presentation was to my very own club, and I said I want to create employment opportunities for people with developmental disabilities. There was that. It was like, who are you talking about? What does this mean? And I learned very quickly that for some people, they're even scared to ask the question because they don't want to be seen as disrespectful. So after we got started and started presenting to other Rotary clubs, and we quite often got asked the question, who are you talking about? What does this mean? A group of Rotarians got together and said, we need to create a video so that when you go into Rotary, we can show them an example of what it is we are talking about. So we found 3 Rotary employers, one of whom had been employing for a long time, and we created a 4-minute video that, in a sense, starts to tell the story of what it is we're asking Rotary to do. So we're going to share that video with you right now, and when we start and go to a Rotary club, this is very often one of the first things we do, is we share this video to show them what it is we're trying to achieve through this partnership.
Our firm is an architectural practice. We've been in business since 1988, and in the last couple of years our firm has grown quite a bit. Having Danielle here has made an impact, and certainly we anticipate that it's going to improve our productivity in terms of what we do. We have a very highly skilled group of people here. A lot of them are professional people with degrees, etc., well trained. They understand that she's here She's helping take some of the load off them, which allows them to carry on and do the more important aspects of what their job is. It's like anybody, when you get that new job, you get a new contract, you are in a position you feel great about yourself, you know that you're confident, and that's what we saw in her.
Part of the challenges of operating a service-type business is the fact that you're dealing with a lot of turnover. You do see a lot of people come through. It's an entry-level position for most people. That's been an ongoing thing over the last 3 years. Rick was the second candidate that we'd interviewed and immediately realized that there was a fit there. He seemed to be what we were looking for. The biggest benefit with hiring Rick was the fact that he's an individual that is stable. We were experiencing high turnover at that time. Rick is happy to be coming to work every day. He's good sense of humor. Rick's on the payroll like everybody else. He gets paid once a month. He's just recently increased his hours. I think the first paycheck he received, he was excited about it. He took his mom out for lunch and was very proud to be able to do that. Hiring people with disabilities has been an improvement to this business, and I think it'll be a big improvement to the next business that we're looking at. And I think anyone out there that has the opportunity should seriously take a look at that.
Corporate Express is the world's largest business-to-business supplier of office products and office furniture. Lloyd's position is a full-time position, full hours, full pay, full benefits. He is an active member of our staff, just like all the other 159.
He's so dependable. He's here every morning at 7 o'clock, even though his shift only starts at 8. You know, he's here making sure the lights are on, and we totally have come to depend on that.
Well, I do a lot of many things here. The first thing I do when I get here, I go to my fire section. I have to cut down boxes, get them ready for recycling. And I pick orders for pickup contract.
Yeah, Lloyd's position here is not a make-work project. We do tailor the job description a little bit to suit his abilities and his needs, but it's all work that has to be done and work that is very valuable to our organization.
He gives 150% no matter what job I ask him to do. He's very, very careful at what he does. I couldn't ask for somebody more responsible for a lot of the jobs that he does for the whole Corporate Express here. Lloyd is always making us laugh. A lot of times, you know, we have to watch ourselves. He's, you know, pulling jokes on us, but we always have to try and get him back, of course.
Well, sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes I do, and they get back at me too.
This works for us. Lloyd is a valuable employee. He's very loyal, very hardworking, 16 years seniority. There's not a whole bunch of other people I can say about in our organization.
What it means for me to work here means that I know I have a job and that to support my family and all that.
Thank you. So the power of Rotary is this. Doug Sellos, the architect that's in that video, that very first day in my Rotary Club when I made the presentation about creating this, even though I didn't know what it was going to be at the time, came up to me at the end of the Rotary meeting and said, well, I want to do this in my Rotary Club too, and I'll be the first one to hire. So the power of Rotary can literally be that strong. So we went from being a project just in my Rotary Club to within the first presentation having 2 Rotary Clubs on board. And in our district, we have 32 Rotary Clubs that are actively engaged in this partnership right now. So the first thing we do is a presentation, and we talk about all we want is for Rotarians to consider opening their doors. And how we do that is we talk about what a job means to them. So just to put your feet in the shoes of somebody with a developmental disability, to not be given a chance, when we think about in our own lives what our career means to us, what that affords us in terms of our life, in terms of our friends, in terms of our life opportunities, and have those Rotarians imagine if that wasn't afforded to them, just simply because nobody had given them a chance, we open doors. Because when we ask people that question, they can't imagine that that is the reality. And so one of the key learnings we've had is that the business community, at least where we are with this particular group, simply didn't understand or don't know that there's a 70% unemployment rate. And now that Rotarians are hiring and can talk about what the difference this has made to their business, this is not a charity model at all. They absolutely talk repeatedly about why hiring somebody with a disability has been a good business decision. And I will say very clearly that I think for Rotarians anyway, it comes to them simply because they have this strong connection to vocation. So we do a presentation, we try to find that one Rotarian, that Doug Solos, in every Rotary Club who's interested. So we're looking for a passionate Rotarian, and that does not mean they have to have anything connected to do with disability. In fact, we've been better off when they've had no connection to disability because they don't come with any myopic vision. So the endless opportunities that have been afforded people because of just the opportunity has been huge. So when I talk about a passionate Rotarian, in every Rotary Club, there are 1 million projects going on. And every year, there's new leadership, and that project changes. A passionate Rotarian is just somebody who's willing to take this ball and carry it. And you, or whoever you're connected with, can provide the support and the information and the energy to help that passionate Rotarian carry the ball. The other thing we do is we set up steering committees, and I'm going to let Robin kind of explain what that looks like.
And the steering committees is really about what we ask Rotary to do. And before we go there, though, I want to just one more time talk about how important it is that this be Rotary driven. As Wendy said, it's important to have the Rotary champion. When I told you a bit about where I started with the project, I was president of AACL and also a Rotarian. And when the partnership started in Edmonton, one of my fellow Rotarians was at a meeting where the Edmonton partnership was discussed, and he came back to Lloydminster and phoned me up, and knowing that I'm part of the disability world and that I was president of AACL, and says, "Robin, why aren't we doing this in Lloydminster?" And I said, "Glenn, I'm not sure. Why aren't we doing this in Lloydminster?" Because I knew if I took this partnership on in my Rotary Club, it would become a disability initiative. But if Glenn took it on, a past president of the club, someone who already had status and influence, it would become an employment initiative. So it makes a powerful difference. So on to what we ask Rotarians to do. So we're pretty clear, we're pretty blunt, we don't mince words. When we have Rotarians that say, "I'm interested in getting involved," we bring them together, and depending on the size of the initiative, for example, in Edmonton, there's multiple clubs that are involved in the partnership, so each club may send a person to a steering committee. Or in Lloydminster, where there's one club involved, we have several people that come together to sit on a steering committee to guide the initiative. We're really clear. Right off the bat, we want you to lead by example. So if you can, we want you to employ somebody. It's interesting, when we first started, I really wondered, can we be so bold as to simply say, yes, hire somebody? And yes, we can be that bold, and that worked. You just have to say, can you hire somebody? Secondly, their role is to encourage their colleagues and friends to do the same thing. So both within the Rotary world, within the club, we want them to be ambassadors for the idea, but beyond the Rotary Club, they each deal daily with dozens of other colleagues. We want you to be ambassadors outside of the Rotary Club. And the third responsibility we asked of Rotarians is that we need them to keep the vision alive. Because as an external force, we can't be the one that makes this live and breathe in Rotary. Only Rotarians can. So their role is to do things that keep the project at the forefront of the club's agenda. They're the ones that talk about the partnership, they talk about the people they've employed, so they promote the initiative within their club.
So we know there's a few things we insist on. So we make the language very clear. Employees must be paid a minimum wage and must work whatever your labor standards are. So in Alberta, it's minimum $8.80 an hour for a minimum of 3 hours a week. There are no wage subsidies. This is real employment for real pay, and it's a real job. It's not a make up anything. It is being part of that business. And so we absolutely insist on a business model, both from the Rotary side and from the job seeker side.
What's interesting is when we got into the work, the insistence on, real work for real pay was interesting. Rotarians instinctively understood why that was important. But occasionally we get a question about, well, why aren't you using wage subsidies? And I don't know what it's like here, but there's a multitude of programs that offer wage subsidies and exemptions, and they're usually framed as a training program. We'll subsidize the wage for so many months. And the outcomes of those programs are pretty dismal. Typically, the subsidy ends, the job ends. So we said, no, we're not going there, just complicates things. We want you to hire people the same way you hire everybody else.
So we know that how this is going to spread is when Rotarians talk to their other colleagues. And the other thing we've learned is when Rotarians are leading it, they actually have way more power than we do. And it becomes, I don't know, do you have anything in Australia similar to peer pressure, one-upmanship? So in my Rotary Club, there were only a few small egos. And I knew that there was a particular Rotarian, if I could get him on board, that it would have influence within our club. And this is a Rotarian, he's a leader in our community, he's very philanthropic, he has influence, people listen to him, and it probably took a couple of years for me to convince him that he should be part of this partnership. And in hindsight, when I've talked to him about this, he said really honestly, the only reason he didn't jump on board right at the beginning was because he didn't want to fail. He didn't want to let me down. He didn't want to let whoever they hired down. Now, this is a man who I would suggest is not worried about failure in a lot of other areas. So I could have said hogwash, but I didn't. I said, okay, then let's work together. Let's prove that this works. So we're sitting at home or wherever we were one night, and the news comes on, and this fellow's name is Jeff, and Jeff is named one of Canada's 50 best managed companies, or his business is, and he has the premier and the mayor there, and he's opening a new building, and the media are there. It's a big deal. And so he decides in all of this that the one thing that he's going to promote, and he didn't come to us and ask for permission, just so you know, this is, again, the power of somebody else owning it, is he chooses to highlight the fact that he has now employed 2 people with a developmental disability.
So we've now been at this for 10 years now. We just recently celebrated at a Rotary District conference the first employee's 10-year anniversary with her employer. She now is on full-time, has a pension. The joke is she's not too excited about the pension, but her father certainly is. And we've had lots of success and learned a lot of things along the way. Obviously, the first thing that we've learned is a Rotary champion is essential. This must be a Rotary-driven initiative. Having said that, it's really important that that Rotary champion be backstopped, supported, connected in some way to the lived experience of someone with a developmental disability. So maybe they have another fellow Rotarian who's a parent, or that there is some connection that feeds that inspiration and keeps the initiative going. We've also learned that it's really important to insist on the business model. Because not so that people get real work for real pay, so that we keep the jobs real. Rotarians have an ethic of service. They want to do the right thing. So more often than not, if we've found that if we don't keep in connection to that Rotarian in that employment situation, what we find out is they'll get themselves maybe in some challenging situations, may need support. They don't phone us, they don't tell us because they don't want to fail, like Wendy indicated, and because they don't want to see somebody without a job. And what we say to them is, actually, you're doing that person, thank you, we understand that, but it's really important that people have real jobs. We're not interested in the charity model. We want it to be real. The job must add value to the company. If this isn't working for you, that's fine. We'll support that person to find employment that's more suitable for them, and maybe you can hire somebody else who's better suited to your job. So it's really important that we stick to the tried and true principles that are already operating in the business environment. Next, creativity and flexibility are required. It was really interesting early on because, as I said, my friend Glenn phoned and said, why aren't we doing this? And I said, why aren't we doing this? So he said, I'll phone 10 Rotarians, we'll have a meeting and we'll see what can happen. And of course, he invited me to the meeting. And our first meeting was very successful. Our CEO for AACL, Bruce Uditsky, came down, and it was very productive. Everybody nodded their head and wanted to go forward. The next meeting was a little bit different. It was a lot of those blank stares. Until I realized pretty soon into the meeting, nobody was saying anything because in some ways, I was present. They were afraid that they'd use the wrong word, they'd say something the wrong way, they'd ask a stupid question. And so just as we ask Rotarians to walk in the shoes of someone who hasn't had those opportunities, we have to be willing to walk in their shoes and be conscious that they may not have the experience we do. So it's been a great learning experience on both sides of the coin, so to speak. And we've talked about Rotarians having that ethic of wanting to help, and sometimes what happens is we just don't ask. So we've learned that you just ask. If it's too much, they'll tell you. But if you don't ask, you've missed an opportunity. And lastly, ongoing support is critical to long-term success. So I indicated earlier that, we make sure we keep in contact with the Rotarians that have become employers. So unlike what is typically happens with our supported employment agencies and people think they have to fade out, we don't fade out. We're there as long as that employment situation exists, we're there to support it. So for some employers, that means we give them a phone call every 2 months. For some, it means we check in weekly. Some we don't touch base for 6 months. It's all individualized, but we never leave that situation. And to date, I think our results have been pretty impressive. We've created 170 jobs. I haven't checked the statistics lately. My role, since I retired as AACL president, I now work for AACL. How did that happen? And my role is to provide support to the coordinators that work in this initiative across the province. And we actually have 5 coordinators, 2 full-time and 3 part-time, that support, as Wendy indicated, over 30 Rotary clubs that are engaged in the partnership. Our average wage rate is $11.90 an hour, and in Alberta, the minimum wage is $8.80. So we're over $2 over minimum wage, which is pretty impressive. People typically work part-time, many because that's what they prefer or what they're able to do. But we do definitely have some people working full-time. And I think one statistic that I'm almost most proud of is 97% are naturally supported. So on average, people use less than 15 minutes per week of paid on-the-job support. So it's been really great learning to understand really that the business community and workplaces have a much greater capacity to support people at work than we give them credit for. And the other statistic that I think is really interesting is many of the folks that currently have jobs through the initiative are those that were written off through the system, who were, considered unemployable, who weren't receiving employment-related supports. So I think that's pretty amazing and certainly speaks for itself. The nature of jobs we've created, and I indicated earlier, we wanted to try and expand the career identity for individuals. And I think Wendy's got a great story of our latest hire, but we have people working as assistant veterinary assistants, forklift operators. They're doing reception, data entry. Many are working in retail settings, absolutely, and in shops doing, typical type of work, but we've certainly have people doing many different things as well.
So we have individuals that are working in CA firms and engineering firms and manufacturing. Basically, wherever there's a Rotarian, there's a potential job. And we feel it's a bit of a coup. It's taken us a bit of time, but there's a large engineering firm, actually they're probably global. Stantec is an engineering firm in Edmonton that has thousands of employees. And, we knew a couple of Rotarians in different Rotary clubs that all worked for this engineering firm. And so we thought it's about time that they got busy. And so we have one passionate Rotarian, that guy who won't let the ball drop, who went into his organization and said, we're seen as key members of the community, we give thousands of dollars, why aren't we doing this? And this engineering firm has just recently hired their 4th person in their Edmonton office. But one of the really cool things is, as AACL, we went in to do a lunch and learn for the organization to just talk about what the employment realities are for individuals with developmental disabilities. We had a young girl come and speak at that presentation who's got significant physical disabilities. She's nonverbal. She uses a communication device, is attending an inclusive post-secondary option that we have in Edmonton, and her dream is to work as an administrative assistant. So she was able to tell the almost 100 people that attended this lunch and learn that really what her goal was to be an administrative assistant. And I think even for some of us in this room, we would look at her and say, yee, don't quite know how that's going to happen. Anyway, one of those Rotarians, engineers, left that lunch and learn, and he said, I'm going to hire her in my team. Anyway, so this young girl, her name is Cassie, is going to inclusive post-secondary during the year, and this summer worked as an administrative assistant. This is still our summer in Alberta, just so you don't think I'm forgetting where I am, and is working at an engineering firm as an admin assistant. But the fellow who hired her told me a great story, because he offered her 37.5 hours a week, and he said, you know, she's pretty persistent because she wheedled me down to 25.
And I think that's just one of the many great stories that have occurred over the last 10 years. And I'd just like to close my comments by telling another story. And this is one of a Rotarian. He just happens to be named Glenn. All Rotarians in Lloydminster are named Glenn. Anyways, Glenn was a fellow that I'd known most of my life. Lloydminster's not a very big place, 25,000 people. I grew up there. I went to school with Glenn, grades 1 to 12. And Glenn is a really quiet man, and he's a journeyman machinist who we live in oil town, so there's lots of opportunity for the trades to do well, and started his own business and has become a Rotarian. And we were approached by one of our local agencies to say, we have this young man who's not in a very good work situation. He's working on a farm. He's getting paid $20 a week, and they take the rest of his wages for room and board. And he works really hard, and we really need to find something better for Dave, because Dave's a great worker. But he'd like to work in kind of an industrial setting. He likes to be with the guys. And so I sat down with one of my fellow Rotarians, and we started to think about, well, where could we look for a job for Dave? Well, she happened to also have gone to school with Glenn, and we both went, well, we could ask Glenn if he'd be interested in hiring Dave. Well, from that one simple phone call, we have created the absolute best advocate we could ask for this initiative. Glenn has hired 3 people himself, and he's actually created 4 more jobs by simply talking to business colleagues. As a matter of fact, recently when our local association was doing a fundraiser, it was Glenn who said he'd be willing to speak about the power of the employment partnership and what it's done for people and the difference it makes. But you know what difference he speaks about? Dave talks very well about what a difference it's made to him. Glenn talks about what the difference it's made for his workplace and how they appreciate Dave, and how, I think he said this to me a million times, if you could find 5 more Daves, I'll hire every single one. Anyways, the best part of this story is prior to his last speaking engagement, and Glenn doesn't talk. He's a journeyman machinist. There's a reason he does that. He's not a public speaker. So I'd asked him to speak several times before, just in front of our Rotary Club. Finally, one day, he pulls me aside and he says, Robin, I don't think we should talk about this anymore. I said, you know, Glenn, I understand if you're nervous. No. He says, you know, I don't think Dave should be part of this initiative. That's when I knew we'd really accomplished something significant. Because I can tell you from my background knowledge, Dave was significantly labeled. He was more than appropriate for this initiative. But because he was now seen as a worker, a friend, an employee, people didn't view Dave anymore as someone with a developmental disability. They just saw Dave.
And I guess the one last thing that I'm really proud of in this initiative, and I continue in the initiative as a volunteer, as a Rotarian, that's my role, is we have had the occasional employment that hasn't worked out, just like every other organization and people without disabilities. It doesn't always work out. But I'm really proud to say we've never lost a Rotary employer. So I think that that speaks to the power of the partnership and what we're able to provide to the initiative.
So when we started, Wendy talked a little bit about her family. And my inspiration probably, I didn't mention initially that when I first became part of AACL and first became a parent, I worked in the generic career development field. So I was a career counselor in a government role. And so I knew that how important career development was, how important it was for everyone. And what was interesting to me was how I wasn't really translating that necessarily to my own personal life. However, you know how the world works, right? It has every once in a while an opportunity to give you a bit of a kick in the butt and teach you the lesson. And that happened for us when Erin was in kindergarten. Now, Erin is now 23 years old, so that's a couple years ago. I had her when I was 10. And
They think that's funny.
I know. So one of Erin's first projects, as I'm sure it is for many kindergarten students, was to create that book about me. You probably have all seen one of those where they draw a picture of their favorite pet, their favorite food, there's a picture of her family, all those things. Well, when Erin brought her book home to show to John, my husband, and I, it was evident the sense of accomplishment in her face. She just couldn't wait to show it to us. And we were obviously very proud of her accomplishments, even though we knew she would have needed lots of support to finish that little book. And we're leafing through it, having a look at it. And when we get to the last page of the book, it says, "What I want to be when I grow up." And that page was blank. And it was at that moment I thought, Robin, this is the world you work in. And I'm not sure why it was blank. I'm not sure if the TA was sick that day or what happened, and it doesn't matter. The point would be, it was a lesson to me to ensure that we were creating expectations for Erin, helping her to have expectations for herself, and more importantly, that the people that surrounded her saw for her a place in that world, that they were creating those aspirations. So we then took that on certainly as a mission to make sure Erin understood that our expectation, just like it is for her brother and sister, that she grow up, get an education. So she attended an inclusive school from grade 1 to 12. Here's a picture of her with her agriculture class. Her dad's a farmer, so that was an important class that she take. And Erin graduated from high school and went on to college. There, look at, there's another mix-up on the PowerPoint, sorry about that, because of course when she graduated, we'd created these expectations, and her friends were going on to college, and that's where Erin went as well. So Erin, thankfully, has 2 jobs at the moment. This is a picture of Erin at Grower Direct, which is a flower shop. She also works at the Home Depot. Both of those positions are because of Rotary. Now Erin's aspiration, and what it has been for a while, is to own her own business. Erin is, we are currently, with the support of her mom and dad, are creating Erin's gift shop. She's a member of the Rotaract Club. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's young Rotarians, so to speak, under the age of 30. And our hope is that Erin will someday become an employer through the Rotary Employment Partnership.